Welcome to our intensive data analysis with PivotTable. This is module 2. And in this module 2, we are going to look at the following topics. We want to see how to create a pivot table, the step-by-step process, selecting the data range, inserting pivot table, and then we are going to look at the rows, the columns, the volume, the values, and the filter fields. We discussed this and we introduced it in our module 1, but in this module 2, we are going to delve deeper into each of them to see how they operate. And then we are going to introduce the other supporting tools that help us to work effectively in pivot table. Now, this is the data set. If you remember this, we introduced this campaign. Is our case study that we'll be using. And we have a lot of questions drawn out of this, which we are going to be attending to towards the end of the course. But we are going to be using it to illustrate the different aspects of pivot table that we'll be using to analyze. So we are going to select our data range, create the pivot table, and then discuss the different fields in the pivot table task pane. Now, I am going to insert pivot table using this data set. Over here on my ribbon, I have this insert button here, over here, insert tool. When I click it, it opens up. And then towards my left here, I have the pivot table. So I'm inserting pivot table. Now, when you look here, you will also see recommended pivot tables. The version that you are using may be different from the one I am using. And so this may be arranged differently. But suffice to say that when you click this insert, this may appear somewhere within this environment. So you look for it. Now, if you want to do a quick analysis, you click this. Intuitively, Excel looks at your data and recommends the kind of pivot tables that it thinks you will need to do a quick analysis. Now, let us explore it briefly. When I click this, look at the different pivot tables that it has recommended. This one is talking about the sum of expenditure by country. This one is talking about the sum of retention by country. This one is talking about the sum of retention, sum of expenditure, and count of population by approach, and so on and so forth. There are several of them. This is telling you the expenditure by groups. So when we look at those questions again that we introduced in our overview and module 1, we'll be able to know which of these helps us. Like I say, this recommended pivot table, they are for quick analysis. So when you look at these suggestions, if any of them gives you what you want, then just click any one and go ahead with it. All right, so if this was the one we were looking for, all I need to do is to click here and we are done. So I'm going to escape so that we come over here and do the pivot table creation by ourselves. Now, I also want to tell us something about this. When you open this, you have these options from table or range or from external data source. This tells us that apart from what you have here, you can also move to wherever the data source is and connect from there. It could be in the cloud, it could be elsewhere. It could even be within an intranet. My system is here, another system is in another room. So we use our intranet to connect. However, what we want to use, the data set is right here on this system. And so it's going to be this. So I will click this. Because I originally clicked inside this data set, Excel begins to highlight what it thinks is the range or table that I'm interested in. And so this is it. And once we are good to go, like I've always emphasized, it's best to place your pivot table on a new worksheet, except those that are experienced, and so they know where to place it for some purposes. So for our own case, because I want to demonstrate some few things, I'm going to place it right here. And so I'm choosing existing worksheet. And then the next thing is which location. So all I need to do is go and click the location where I want it to be placed. And I okay this. And there we are. So this is our pivot table. And we can go ahead and do what we want to do. However, there's another method of inserting a pivot table, which I would like to briefly tell us. Okay, so I'm going to delete this. I'm going to delete this. And then I'm clicking inside here again, because that is where my data is. It's always good practice. If this data is what you want to use to create your pivot table, it's always good practice to drop your cursor there on the active data set. Now I'm going to use shortcuts to create. I'm not going to use my mouse. I'm just going to use the keyboard. So the first thing I do is to press the key button, Alt, A-L-T. Once I click it, see what happens to the ribbon. It has given them code. Then the next thing is, if you look at this point, you will see that this is insert. And insert has the code N, the letter N. So I'm going to press N. When I press N, it opens up. And then these other smaller tools have also been given code. And for my pivot table, the other code is V. So I'm going ahead to press V, and then the option opens up. Now the option again, remember we say you could connect to a standard data source or within the table range if it is here on your system. So I'm going ahead to press T, and then it brings us to that point where we started. All right, so this is exactly how to use the shortcuts. And so I'm going to place this on this existing worksheet because of what I want to explain. So I'm selecting this, I'm okaying this. There we are again. The moment you select and paste your pivot table and your cursor is on this pivot table, because you can see the pivot table, my cursor is clicked and is active. If I click outside, this task pane, this field goes off. When I click here, it goes off. When I click back again, the task pane comes back again. So when you place this pivot table, you have created two environments on this spreadsheet, the environment for the pivot table and the one for your worksheet. Remember that we are going to be working on this data, but we are not going to change the structure or whatever. Not even one value here will change. All right, so when I click here, I'm activating the power pivot table fields to come up again. Now, this pane is floating. I can drop it this side, assuming I'm working this side and I don't want the space to be blocked. And this, I can also drop it anywhere. So wherever I want to place it, I can. Now, one thing I want to explain is when you look at this, all this here represent the headers of your original data set. So you will see we have this, which is the approach, the group, the country, the month, enrollees, recruited, population, expenditure, and retention. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now let's count our data set. How many columns? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So let me bring it back again. So this represents the various headers in our original data set. Now, having said that, we are going to be describing how these 4 fields, they interact and are useful. And before then, I just want to quickly say that once you are working with this pivot table, if this blocks your way and you want to remove it, all you need to do is to exit. Okay, so I'm going to exit right here, and then it goes off. Now, sometimes you may mistakenly exit, and then it goes off. And then when you want to use it, you can't find it because you were not conscious of when you exit or you closed it. So what you need to do is you go back to your pivot table, analyze button, and then here you will see your field list. You click it and it pops up again. All right, so this is what we need to know about the disappearance of these pivot table fields. Now, let's look at these 4 fields: the rows, the columns, the values, and the filter. Now, the rows and columns, they are the foundational elements of your pivot table. They are the ones that determine how your data is organized and presented. Talking about this row and this column, they are the fundamental elements. Now, let's see how they go. The row, which is this one, this serves as the primary organizing factor. It lists your unique values in rows, creating a horizontal layout. Now, for instance, this is our table, our pivot table. I'm going to pick one of these, let's say country. I'm clicking country, holding it, dragging it, and bringing it to the rows. Like we say, it has created a row. These are unique countries. These are all the countries that participated in this campaign. And like we say, it has created a unique value. There is none that is repeated here. No country is repeated. So it's just one, and it gives you the rules. All right, so this is how this works. Now, for the column also does the same thing. But what in its own case, it puts it on the columns. Say we remove this and we take it, let's take the country again and drop it here. You see how our table now looks. It is now arranged them uniquely again, but now they are at the top headers. Now, when you combine these two, it gives you cross tabulation. Now, we can present the pivot table in different fashion and view them from different perspectives. Now, let's see what this means. If I bring my approach here, see how the thing is. Okay, so this is the grassroots, the national. Remember that the campaigns were conducted using 3 different approaches: the grassroots campaign approach, regional campaign approach, and then the national campaign approach. Now, with this tabulation, I want to see how each country fares in terms of the enrollees. So now let's take our enrollee and we drop it. Where's our enrollees recruited? Over here. We bring this now to the value field. You see how we are looking at our data in a different perspective right now. So with this, you could say that the grassroots over here campaign for each country, these are their representations. And then we are looking at the total for the entire campaign, for the whole period that it lasted, for all the countries that participated. This is the total number of enrollees recruited for the program. Can see? So this is also to tell you that PivotTable, you use PivotTable to view your data from different perspectives. I might be interested to pivot it and then flip my column to become my rows, while my rows become my columns. I can pull this here and bring this here. You can see that my rows are now taking or accommodating the countries, while the columns accommodate the approaches. Now, I want to talk about the value, because the value is another key area. This is where the magic happens at this point here. You know, once I remove this over here, there is nothing happening here. You can see, you have just set this up. So inside this is where the magic happens. And a lot happens here. So we are going to do this one after the other using the relevant values that can be accommodated under the values. The first one we have looked at is the number of enrollees recruited. So you can see that each of these countries, these are their values, the number of enrollees. Now, if I'm not interested in number of enrollees, I remove it, or I can also uncheck it. Then I'm interested in population. This is the population now. So this is telling me again that this is the population. Remember that the different ways that you present your pivot table will give you different meanings or different analysis. In this case now, we are analyzing country by country, how they fared by approach, as we can see. But if it was the other way, say we have our country here, we have our approach here, then we are looking at approach. We are looking at the total value for each approach. And then we're also looking at country per country. So depending on what you are looking at, I can also remove this population, uncheck it, and then check my expenditure. Now, this is in USD. This was the amount spent, the expenditure spent for each of these campaigns. For Botswana, for instance, it spent $151,000. Approximately that. For grassroots, it spent $125,752 for the national campaign. It spent $146,640 for the regional. And this is the total value it spent, or total expenditure for this country. Now, one of the questions that we'll be looking at again is talking about the cost effectiveness. You are able to recruit this with this, okay? What is the total number of recruitments that you did by expending this? So it's a different thing. We are creating we may create different pivot tables. One, looking at the quantity, the number of enrollees that happened, and then using it to compare it with the cost of getting those enrollees on board. All right, so these are the very components of your pivot table. Now let's look at the filter. Now, when you come to the filter allows you to narrow down the data shown in your pivot table. And this can be based on specific criteria. For instance, now, we might decide to say, okay, for this pivot table we are looking at now, this report we are looking at now, because this is a report. It's telling you, well, at the end of this, or at the end of the campaign, the grassroots campaign for Botswana was this. It's a report. But assuming we want to look at it closely, we are zooming to look at the years and the months that these things happen. Then we can now apply the filter. So let's apply filter on the month. We drop our month here. You can see the moment I drop my month here, another row over here is created. This is also part of the pivot table. And so it becomes important to mention here that whenever you are putting in, you are placing your pivot table, always allow maybe 2 or 3 rows ahead, because a time might come, you may just be interested in applying filters. And so it will look for space up. If there's no space, you might get an error. All right, so now that I have this here, let's look at what we can do. When I open up this, it has displayed all the months. Remember that our data are in months. You can see it again. These are in months, like you can see this is January, February 2012, February, March, April, and so on and so on for Nigeria for Group A. So it's been arranged on a monthly basis. So if we open this, we want to look at the, to be able to select one or multiple entries. So let me deselect all and select only January, for instance. Remember, we said that filter allows you to zoom in and look at a particular element more closely. So we want to see what's the contribution of January 2012. This is it for each of those countries. What about February? That is it. Same thing. Let's say this is June. It gives us that. Now, another way we can look at this, remember that these countries, they are grouped. Group A may be the very well-to-do countries. We have not defined that, but during the course of this training, we can assign income values to the groups, okay? So if we are going to use our group, let's bring our group again. Let's put our group under filter. So we have seen, we have applied to filter, and this is how it is also. All right, so here we have this again. Let me activate this multiple entries. Let me deselect all. Let me select for all the countries that are in Group A. So this is how they stand. And you see it has removed the other countries that do not belong to Group A. So we have 3 countries, Cameroon, Niger, and Nigeria, they're in Group A. What of Group B? Group B is Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Liberia, and so on and so forth. So you can decide to apply different categories, you apply your filter to different fields, and you begin to get them zoomed, and then you examine them better. All right, so this is explaining how this work. Now, another thing that I want to look at, specify here is, let me uncheck everything that we have checked, and then let's have our table return to 0. One more thing is checked, that's approach, and then it goes off. Now, I can bring values here, I can bring things here which do not have values. And then because you are forcefully bringing it here, the Excel is telling you that PivotTable can take counts of this. How many times did this occur? Let's say I bring my group here. You see, it's telling you counts. There are 1,296 times that these groups occur. I remove this. What about my country? it's also the same thing. This represents the number of times that this record happens here. This is it here, 1,296, because the first one is the header. So if you remove the header from 1297, it becomes 1296. All right. So I can use this to count how many times each country occur. Now I'm going to use text fields to just demonstrate this. Now I have the country there and I have the country here. See what's happening? It has listed, remember, I bring my country under the row and it's giving me all the countries, the unique countries. And I bring the same country to my value area and it's giving me the count. This is the number of times that each of these countries should face here. Now, assuming I'm going to do something here. So for these 3 or 4, I'm going to change this to a different thing. Let's say I'm changing it to Cameroon, all of them. All right, so I have changed figure here. Remember, all of them are 72, 72 across. Just watch what happens to Nigeria and Cameroon. I'm going to refresh this pivot table right now so that it goes and fetch new data from this data source. All right, so I'm going to click refresh and I'm sure it has refreshed. Now let's see what we have on our pivot table. Cameroon has increased by 4, while Nigeria has reduced by 4. All right, so it's telling us the number of times that each of these countries occurs, or how many times the entries under this row appear in the report. All right, so now let's just quickly run through some of the other features that we have on the pivot table that helps us to interact effectively and come up with useful insights. When I click on my table, keep the pivot table as it is right now, I can see that I have this highlighted. So these are the 2 basic things that you can use and work on the pivot table, either this or the design. Now let's look at the different options available in the pivot table. Now I have at the extreme here is the pivot table itself. So when I open it, it gives me the name. So let me just rename this. Say this is our demo pivot table. See, I have put space and it's going to accept it. Previously, it wasn't so. So you could have several pivot tables, giving them different names. And that's a good practice because when you begin to run different charts, each pivot table will have a different chart, of course. And then you begin to connect them. At some point, you want to know which chart is coming from a pivot table. And so if you are able to name them and then you click the chart will tell you that this is derived from this pivot table. And then if you need to do any connection, you know what you are going to connect. So as time goes on, especially when we come to module 7, when we'll be talking about charts and dashboards, we will talk more on report connection and making them interactive. All right, so this is this for here. And then, okay, this just shows you what you have selected. Here is the count of country. When I click here, it changes. All right, so if you have several fields here, whichever one you click, it tells you the value. So here, it's also, you can change the names, okay? So long as it is not, you are not repeating it there. So I can say name of country, and then it sticks. This is become the name of country, although here it hasn't changed. All right, so it's just to tell you that this is what you want. All right, If I want to change the name here, I can simply come here and write name of country, and it sticks. Okay, okay, this already exists some place here. All right, so okay, this was the one that we just changed. So it will not accept a name that is already there, but I can play a trick. Okay, this trick that I'm going to play also plays out when you are running data analysis, because when there are spaces in a cell, that space creates a different identity to the content of that cell. Now, this is a name of the name of country. This is the name that we have put there, and I cannot rename it with a name that is already existing. But by placing a space and I enter, it accepts it as a different name because of that space. And the moment I go over here and remove that space and enter, it flags this error that that name already exists. Okay, so this is something that we need to watch out for. Then here again, okay, of course, it's telling you that I must change this name. So let me put space. And then when I come over here, I can change this also to country. All right, this becomes a different field for this. So when I look over here, I'll see this group. Because you can use this to look at your groups, the way they are arranged, and you basically you apply this to numbers and dates. Okay, there may be other exceptions where you can apply groups to text fields. It's not a common thing. I haven't tried that, but with numbers you can. All right, so assuming I bring in my dates right now, let's bring my months. I'm bringing my months to the column here. You can see that this has become active now. So I can click the group field and see how I want to view them. So I am seeing the years, quarters, and months. If my dates capture days, if my date capture hours, minutes, seconds, I can go there and choose them, and then I can view my data in days, in hours. But what I have is in months, and so it goes up higher. So after months, up in the ladder, you have quarters. And after the quarters, up in the ladder, you see years. So if, assuming I want to see my data only in months, so I would deselect the years, deselect the quarters, and leave it this way. All right, so this is a very wonderful way of viewing your data. So assuming I want to see them, you see how it has arranged it now, quarter by quarter. Quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. And this represents each of the year. All right, so assuming I want to remove this now, let's bring in money. Let's say the expenditure. I bring expenditure over here. We can actually have a better view with this expenditure. It's telling us how much was spent by this country for each quarter of the period that the campaign ran. All right, so the other things here are this filter. As time goes on, we'll still be looking at this slicer and then the timeline. The timeline is for the dates. So you just be clicking, and then especially it makes it interactive. Okay, when you create your dashboard or just create other charts, you connect them together with dates so that whichever chart that is connected to the timeline, you click a particular date, those charts will change and display the values for that date that you have selected. As time goes on, we are still going to explore this to see how this works. Of course, we have used this refresh button. When you make update on the source data, come over here, click refresh, pivot table goes and pulls the data, the updated data from the source, and then present them. Whether the pivot table has been used to create charts, the chart will update automatically. The same thing applies here. If you want to change your source, this is what we use. Assuming that I made a mistake and said, oh, this was not the data set that I wanted to use, but I've made mistake. So all I needed to do is to come over here and say, okay, I want to change my source. So it's the moment you click this, it highlights the original source. And then you can now go ahead and select a new data set. All right, so let's cancel this. Let's proceed. So these options here are what you want to use to clear your data on your pivot table or the filters that you have applied. Okay, here you use it to either select your entire pivot table, or if any of these values are active, you can go there to select. Then here, the calculation, this is a place where we do custom calculation. For instance, now, there might be question for us to identify what is the effectiveness of each row. Say, for instance, now, we'll say Nigeria enrolled 26,718 from a population of 1.3 or 133,863 persons is the population, and it was only able to get 26,000. So we want to see what percentage does this represent. Okay, so we come to pivot table calculation field here to calculate items, to calculate fields, and other things. All right, so this is very beautiful. In this tutorial, we are going to be discussing all this. Over here, we have our pivot chart for visualization. Of course, this was where we came and we requested for recommended pivot tables. And I have shown this already. You want to remove this, you just X this, and then it goes off. And if you have, like in this point, we don't really have where we can use this plus and minus buttons. Assuming that, let me bring this back again, and let me demonstrate this. We bring this here, and under the name here, we have, let's say we're bringing the group here. So you see this, and then I have this, I can click this and close it. And in a better way to look at this is to carry your group up, bring your group up, bring your country down. So I can do this by just clicking, dragging, and exchanging them. And then I have them grouped this way. So if I want to hide this positive and negative, it goes off. Okay, so this becomes like this. I don't have the option of expanding, but if I hit it back again, it comes up. I can close here so that nobody sees the countries that are in other group here. Same thing here, the same thing here. All right, so what happens if these things are like this, and I click and I unhide, rather I hide this button? You are not able to tell which countries are here. But when you come to D, you see the countries under D. For E, you see the countries under E. This is because these were like this when this was deactivated. So when I activate it, those buttons come back again. All right, so, and then for here, these are the field headers. They are hidden. Okay, so what happens? I can't see the header here again. Let's come back with them. I can see the country has come back again. When I click it, it goes off again. All right, so these are the different tools and buttons that help us to interact with the pivot table and come up with something very interesting. The other button here, the major button, is the design. Okay, so you'd use this, assuming you want to design your pivot table, you can change the colors. Okay, check different themes. See the way the colors are changing, just the way you do with ordinary Excel official table. Okay. So this is all for this. And then right under here also, we have this here. This is very, very interesting. Over here, I have in this column, the grand total. I might not be interested in this total. I might be interested. And right under here again, this total, column total, I might not be interested. This row total, I might not be interested. So how do we remove them? Under this design, let's look at them from at this point here. You can see your subtotal, you can see your grand total. When you click here, you can look at the different things that this can do for you. Let's see what happens here. Because I have deactivated that, so the figure here has gone off. So let's bring it back again, show on all, and then they are there. All right, so show subtotal at the top, it comes back again. All right, so for here also, this is talking about this total and the one we have under this. So how do we work on that? When you open here, so let me carry this up. When you come here, I'm going to switch it off for both the column and the row. And then here goes off. We don't see it down here again. So let's switch it up again, on for rows and columns. They come back again. So you have the option to switch off or on for any of them. If it is on alone for row, the row comes up. So you see the total here, giving us the total for each row, total for each row. And if I want to switch on only for column, I click this, only for column appears. Again, these are, if you want to have branded columns, banded columns rather. How does this work? Let's see the rows. You see the bands appearing. It goes off. Well, of this, it appears also. Now let's remove the colors and then see how this works out. Okay, so what about my row headers, my column headers? All right, so you just go on switching them off and on to see how they work. And banded rows, let's see, we need to take a color that can show, let's see this, okay, rows, row headers, column headers. So you see that the bands are off. For the headers, on and off, you can see the difference. For the rows, you can see the difference. You can see the difference. All right, so these are the things that we need to know. For this video, we've been able to look at the pivot table, how to create it from the scratch, how to select our data range, because this is our data range, how to use the different 4 fields of pivot table to interact and come up with something very useful. We have also seen how we can manipulate and flip the table around to have different views, different perspectives of the pivot table. I hope you have enjoyed the video, and we are going to move on to module 3. And in module 3, it's going to also be an exciting time where we're going to be looking at key important things in important topics in our training. We'll be looking at how to change the pivot table layout, how to group data, and then we can now look at sorting and filtering. So this is all we have for today. Look out for the coming modules, and then also in between the weeks, we are also going to be releasing other tips, other topics that are not consigned or related. Not, they may be related, but they are not captured or encapsulated in this course. They are for other things that we do. You know, Excel is a very versatile program. So we'll be sharing some of those tips on how to, especially like conditional formatting, data tools, and some key functions, things that will make you work more productively. There are times you may want to perform an operation, and then with the little knowledge that you have, you will spend like 10, 15 minutes. But with the nuggets that we'll be sharing, you can do that in less than a minute. Okay, so those things help to improve our productivity. So once again, thank you for your time watching this movie. And we hope you'll be able to share this and help us to continue to bridge the skills gap within Africa. Thank you, and see you later.